Hello. This video is the angle between two lines. We're talking about alpha, the angle between L1 to L2, where L1 and L2 are not perpendicular. Then we're talking about the tangent of alpha equals the slope of line 2 minus the slope of line 1 over 1 plus the slope of line 1 times the slope of line 2. So that means that alpha is the tangent inverse of the slope of line 2 minus the slope of line 1 over 1 plus the slope of line 1 times the slope of line 2. Notice that in this case, alpha is in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. You're going to need to draw the graph so that you know what line 1 and line 2 look like so that you can find what alpha is. In order to work these questions, you're also going to need to know the unit circle. You should remember the unit circle from your trig. The way I remember it is I only memorize the first quadrant and then I move the angles around so that I can find the other angles. So it may take me a few minutes. Secondly, on your test, just so that you don't have to have a calculator that finds the tangent inverse, all your angles that you have to calculate will come from the unit circle, or I will give them to you, and you'll have to go from there. Because remember, your test is multiple choice. You know the first quadrant, 30, 45, 60. Then you know 90 and 0. Then you have 180 and 270. I don't care if you give me the degrees or the pi, but you'll have to know the points. So 1/2, square root of 3 over 2, square root of 2 over 2, 0 and 1, whichever one. But you'll need to know this slide. The next thing that will be very helpful are Pythagorean triples. And these are the 4 that will be the most common that I will use. So 3, 4, 5, 5, 12, 13, 8, 15, 17, 7, 24, and 25. These are the 4 that I will most likely use throughout the whole course. And I'm just going ahead and giving them to you now. Find the angle from L1 to L2 with slopes M1 and M2 respectively. So M1 is 5, M2 is -1. So we want to find the tangent alpha. So M2 minus M1 over 1 plus M1 times M2. Plugging it into our formula, we have that it's 3/2. So using the inverse trig function on your calculator, you find the angle. If your calculator does not have an inverse trig function, you are more than welcome for the homework to use a mathematical program called Wolfram Alpha or another app. On the test, I will either give you angle from the unit circle or I will give you the tangent inverse. So using the trig function from your calculator, you find out that alpha is 56.3099. Next example. Find the angle from L1 to L2 with slopes M1 and M2 respectively, where M1 is 0 and M2 is -1. The tangent alpha M2 minus M1 over 1 plus M1 times M2. Tangent alpha is -1. The tangent inverse of -1 is pi over 4, because the only place that tangent inverse is -1 is at pi over 4. So we know that it's a -45 degrees. Find the angle from L1 to L2, where L1 and L2 contain the points. For this example, they're not giving us any of the slopes, so we're first going to have to calculate the slope. So the points for L1 are 2, 5 and -310, and the points for L2 are -1, -3, and 3, 3. So our slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So our slope for our m1 is -1, and our m2 is 3/2. So our tangent alpha, m2 minus m1 over 1 plus m1 times m2, when we simplify that, we have 3/2 minus a -1, which is 3/2 plus 1, over 1 plus 3/2 times -1, so that's 1 minus 3/2. So we end up with 5/2 over -1/2, which reduces to -5. So we find the tangent inverse of alpha. So we find the tangent of alpha equals -5. So using our calculator, we find that alpha equals the tangent inverse of -5, which is -1.3734 degrees. Well, when we draw our angle, our lines, that's what we get. And it's saying that that alpha is -1.37 degrees. That's not right. That's not a -1 degrees. So what does that mean? That means that we're looking at alpha plus 180. So that's 178 degrees. This is why I said that you need to make sure that you draw your lines. So you need to be careful and make sure that what you're being asked for is what you're looking for. Next, find the slope of the line bisecting the angle from L1 to L2 with slopes M1 equals 1 and M2 equals -7 respectively. So we're looking for the slope of the bisecting line. If the angle between the bisector of the line was slope M and L1, for the formula we have alpha equals A1, alpha 1, and M1, M2 equals 1, and M2 equals M, and that should be equals to 7. So we have the bisector is M, we know that M2 is 7, and we have alpha 1 and alpha 2. Tangent of alpha is M2 minus M1 over 1 plus M1 times M2. That's just our formula. So we have tangent of alpha 1 is M minus M1 over 1 plus M1 times M. With the angle between the bisector and the line with slope M and L2, so the top one is for alpha 1. Now we're looking at alpha 2. For the formula we have alpha is alpha 2, M1 is M, M2 is M2 equals -7. So now we have tangent of alpha 2 is M2 minus M1, 1 plus M times M2. So now let's put this together. So we have the tangent of alpha 1 is M minus M1 over 1 plus M1M. The tangent of alpha 2 is M2 minus M over 1 plus M times M2. We know that alpha 1 equals alpha 2 because they're a bisector, because it's an angle bisector. So that means that tangent of alpha 1 equals the tangent of alpha 2. So that means that we have M minus M1 over 1 plus M1 M equals M2 minus M over 1 plus MM2. Now let's substitute our numbers. So that's M1 over 1 plus M equals -7 minus M over 1 plus M minus 7 times -7, so 1 minus 7M. So we find the LCD, multiply both sides by the LCD. That gives us 2 parentheses on each side. So we have 1 minus 7M times 1 minus M equals 1 plus M times -7 minus M. We distribute, we just multiply that out, and we get -7M squared plus 8M minus 1 equals -M squared minus 8M minus 7. We're going to set that equal to 0. So we get 0 equals 6m squared minus 16m minus 6. Factor. So we're going to factor out a 2. Then we're going to factor the trinomial that's left. And when that factors all out, we get 2 times 3m plus 1 times m minus 3. Set each factor equal to 0. So we get m equals negative 1/3 and m equals 3. Now if we go back to our picture, when we look at our two possible slopes, we're only going to consider the positive 3 because our bisector is the positive slope. So our answer is m equals 3. Find the slope of the line bisecting the angle from L1 to L2 with the slope of m1 equals to 3/4 and the slope of m2 that doesn't exist. So that means that the slope of m2, line 2, is actually the y-axis or a vertical line. And again, we're looking for the bisecting line. So the tangent of alpha 1 is m minus m1 over 1 plus m1. So that's m minus 3/4, 1 over 1 plus 3/4 m. M is the slope of the bisector. Alpha 2, tangent of alpha 2, well, if I look at the tangent of alpha 2, that slope is undefined, so I'm going to look at the cotangent of theta is the same thing as the tangent of alpha 2. So that's 1 over the tangent is the cotangent of theta. 1 over the tangent of theta is the same thing as the tangent of alpha 2. And so that's 1 over m. So then I have 1 over m equals m minus 3/4 over 1 plus 3/4 m. I find the LCD, multiply both sides by the LCD, so that's, and simplify. So when I do that, I get 1 plus 3/4 m equals m times m minus 3/4. Multiply that out, and I have 1 plus 3/4 m equals m squared minus 3/4 m. Set it equal to 0, so 0 equals m squared minus 3/2 m minus 1. Again, I'm going to get rid of the denominator because it'll be easier to factor, so I'm multiplying everything through by 2. So that's 0 equals 2m squared minus 3m minus 2. I factor this and I get 0 equals 2m plus 1 times m minus 2. Set each factor equal to 0, so I get m equals negative 1/2 and m equals 2. If I go back to my picture, I find that my slope is the positive, so m equals 2. Find the interior angles of the triangles. So I'm going to plot my points. So how am I going to do this? I'm going to plot my points or graph my points, draw the lines, label the lines, and find the slopes of each of the lines. The slope of AB is 3, the slope of BC is 5/6, and the slope of CA is 3/4. Now I'm going to find the angles between the lines or the sides of the triangles using the tangent of alpha is m2 minus m1 over 1 plus m1 times m2. So for angle A, so if I have my angles and my slopes, there's the inside of the triangle, there's A, that's the angle that it's going to give me for angle A, okay? And the calculations are here. So that's going to be the tangent of angle A, right? So for angle A, I'm going to have 3/4, 3, right? So we go ahead and calculate this angle, but when I look at it, when I look at the picture, what it's giving me is this 34 is this degree. So is that the angle I want? What I want is I want the inside angle. So what I have to do is I have to find that 180 minus the 34. So angle A is 145 degrees, 0.341. Now when I go to find angle B, so this temptation here is to just, okay, well, I know my slopes, I can just put it into the formula, but you have to make sure you're looking at the picture and you're finding which angle you're looking at. So for angle B, I'm actually finding this angle, which is the angle I'm looking for. So angle B is actually 21.37 degrees, but angle A was the angle outside the triangle. For angle C, I'm finding, so now let's go and find C. I'm finding the angle from L1 to L2, and I'm finding the 13.3245, which is the angle I'm actually looking for. So you need to make sure that when you're finding the angles of the interior of the triangle, when you're finding those lines, that you're finding the correct angle. Find the slope of the line L1 such that the angle from L1 to L2 is the arctangent 2/3. Well, L2 contains 2, 1, and -4, -5. So if arctangent is 2/3, then what does that mean? That means that the tangent of alpha is 2/3. So if M2 is 1 plus 5 over 2 plus 4 equals 1, then what we have is the tangent of alpha is equal to M2 minus M1 over 1 plus M1 times M2. So we have 2/3 equals 1 minus M1 over 1 plus M1. So multiply both sides by the LCD, which is 3 times 1 plus M1. This is the third time that we have used multiplying by the LCD. And when we simplify, we get 2 times 1 plus M1 equals 3 times 1 minus M1. Distribute 2 plus 2M1 equals 3 minus 3M1. So we get 5. M1 equals 1. So M1 equals 1/5. So this is the third time we have multiplied by the LCD and simplified down the fraction. Actually, the fourth, because we did it once with just a simple number. We did it once in the slopes. So this is an important, multiplying by the LCD is an important concept. We have also factored 3 or 4 times. So if these concepts are things you're struggling with, you need to make sure you go back and review your algebra skills. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.